Ancient Rome. When we talk about this empire, what comes to mind? Powerful emperors, unstoppable legions, Hollywood-worthy gladiator fights? Yes, all of that is true. But you know what no one tells you? What it was like to be a teenager in ancient Rome. If you think your parents are strict for not letting you stay up late playing video games, congratulations, you would have loved Rome. Because by 14 or 15 years old, you were already considered an adult. That meant you could get married, run a business, be sent off to war, and, of course, get into trouble like any teenager. Except now, you could actually be tried as a real criminal. Good luck with that. The truth is, the modern concept of teenage years simply didn't exist. One minute, you were a kid playing with your bulla, a protective amulet, and the next, someone slapped you on the back, ripped off your amulet, and said, "Congratulations, you're an adult now. Go manage the empire's economy and try not to die before you're 30. And don't think girls had it any easier. While boys were thrown into adulthood with a toga and a mountain of responsibilities, girls were often being prepared for marriage before they even turned 13. But what about the rebellious phase? The parties. The impossible crushes. Young Padawan, rebellion was a privilege for the lucky few, and as for parties, well, Roman parties made modern spring break look like a tea party. So buckle up, because today, we're diving headfirst into the insane experience of being a teenager in ancient Rome. We'll explore schools that felt more like military boot camps, coming-of-age rituals that looked like extreme college hazing, noble teenage gangs terrorizing the city, and, of course, wild festivals where even senators lost all self-control. Tie your toga tight, because this is going to be a wild ride. Hey Discovers, real quick before we dive back in, I've got a small favor to ask. If you love historical curiosities, epic battles, crazy mysteries, and mind-blowing stories that most people don't know about, then hit that subscribe button right now. That way, you won't miss any of our new videos and can keep uncovering insane facts every week. And of course, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and brings you even more awesome content. Alright, let's jump back into history. Okay, so you survived childhood. Congrats! But before you even get to enjoy the bare minimum of being a teenager, boom. Rome decides you're an adult now. And no, there's no graduation ceremony with a diploma and a cheesy speech. Instead, there's a fire, a toga, and possibly some light emotional trauma. This whole coming-of-age experience happened during a festival called Liberalia, which sounds like a fun party but was actually the Roman version of congratulations. Now your life is 100% harder. Boys around 14 or 15 had to burn their bulla, a protective amulet they'd worn since birth, because apparently adults didn't need protection. Spoiler, they totally did. Then they put on the toga virilis, the plain white toga that symbolized their newfound maturity. Which, let's be honest, was just an ancient version of your parents handing you a suit and telling you to get a job. But wait, it gets better. Because once you wore that toga, the training wheels were off. You could now be married, own property, sign contracts, be dragged into politics, and everyone's favorite, be held legally responsible for your actions. Mess up. Now you're not just grounded, you're on trial. And just in case that wasn't terrifying enough, some families like to make things even harder. Wealthy families would sometimes send their newly adult sons on long, dangerous trips across the empire to toughen them up. Others threw them into brutal physical challenges, because nothing says, "Welcome to adulthood," like nearly getting trampled in a horse race. And if you're thinking, well, at least the girls didn't have to go through that, think again. Girls didn't get a toga ceremony. Oh no. Their big moment came when they got engaged, which could happen disturbingly early. Instead of celebrating their adulthood with a toga and some wine, they were often being handed off to a husband and told, "Congrats, you're a wife now. Good luck." So yeah, forget about a rebellious teenage phase. You weren't sneaking out to parties or arguing with your parents over curfews. By 15, you were expected to act like a fully grown citizen. And if you weren't ready, too bad. Rome was. So, ready for school? Oh, you thought it was going to be easier? Think again. Alright, so you survived the terrifying welcome to adulthood ceremony. Now, if you were lucky enough to be from a wealthy family, You got to enjoy the absolute joy of Roman education. And by joy, I mean a daily battle for survival. Roman schools were less like modern classrooms and more like a cross between a military drill and an extreme memorization contest. There were no fun group projects or open book exams. Nope. You learned by listening, repeating, and hoping you got it right. Because if you didn't, your teacher had a very hands-on way of correcting mistakes. And by hands-on, I mean they would literally beat the lesson into you. If you think your teacher yelling at you for not doing your homework is bad, imagine getting smacked with a ferula, a stick specifically designed for maximum pain. That's right, corporal punishment wasn't just encouraged, it was basically a part of the curriculum. If you messed up a math equation or forgot a line from a Cicero speech, you didn't just lose points, you gained bruises. And it wasn't just about memorization. Boys also had to train in running, swimming, and wrestling, because, let's face it, most of them were expected to end up in the army or politics. And in Rome, even politicians needed to know how to fight, because Senate meetings could get, let's say, physical. Now, if you were rich, things were slightly easier. You still had to learn everything, but at least you had a personal slave to carry your books, because, apparently, holding your own scrolls was considered beneath an aristocrat. Imagine showing up to school today with a personal assistant just to carry your backpack. And for the record, girls, they rarely got formal education. Most of them were taught at home, learning how to manage a household and maybe a little reading and writing if their family cared enough. But if you were a girl hoping for an academic career, forget it. Your final exam was basically marriage. So yeah, the next time you complain about school being boring, just remember, at least you're not memorizing Latin poetry under the threat of a beating. And speaking of things that were totally out of control, let's talk about Roman parties. Because wow, they did not hold back. Okay, so school was basically a survival challenge, but there was one time of the year when teenagers in ancient Rome could finally let loose. The festivals. And, oh boy, did they take advantage of it. The most infamous of them all? Saturnalia. Think of it as a mix between Christmas, Mardi Gras, and a government-sponsored spring break. For an entire week, all social rules were thrown out the window. Slaves were allowed to act like masters, people gambled in the streets, and, most importantly, everyone, including teenagers, was absolutely hammered. See, unlike today, drinking age laws weren't really a thing. Wine was basically water in Rome, partly because actual water was kind of dangerous to drink. So, by the time you were a teenager, you were already expected to drink like a seasoned politician. And during festivals like Saturnalia, it was an all-you-can-drink buffet. Imagine a party where even the senators are blackout drunk, and suddenly, you get why the Roman Empire had some questionable decision-making at times. But it didn't stop at drinking. Some parties turned into full-blown orgies, where people ate, drank, and celebrated until they passed out. And if that sounds excessive, well, Romans had a special trick for dealing with overindulgence, the good old vomitorium. Yep, some of them literally ate so much that they had designated areas to throw up, just so they could go back and keep partying. And it wasn't just Saturnalia. There were tons of festivals throughout the year, meaning Roman teenagers basically had multiple chances to go full party animal. Some celebrations even let people openly mock public officials. Imagine walking up to your least favorite teacher and roasting them to their face without consequences. It was basically the ancient version of getting away with a viral roast on Twitter. So yeah, while we think of Rome as this super sophisticated empire, their festival scene was absolute chaos. And when the parties ended, some of these teens weren't ready to give up the fun, so they formed gangs. Because, apparently, throwing wild parties wasn't enough trouble for them. If you think rowdy teens today are bad, let me introduce you to Roman teenage aristocrats. These kids weren't just rebellious, they were menaces to society. And the best part? They could get away with almost anything. See, in Rome, young noblemen had way too much money, way too much free time, and zero adult supervision. So what did they do? They formed gangs. And not just any gangs. These were elite, rich kid gangs that would go out at night and absolutely wreck the city for fun. Think of them as ancient frat boys, but with more violence and no consequences. These gangs would break into taverns, start fights, and even challenge random people, sometimes gladiators, to street brawls. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine a group of privileged teenagers getting drunk and thinking, you know what would be fun? Fighting a man whose job is literally to kill people for sport. And because they were rich, if they did get caught, they'd just bribe someone and walk away like nothing happened. One of the most infamous teenage delinquents. Nero. Yep, before he became emperor, young Nero ran around with a gang, harassing the citizens of Rome, vandalizing property, and getting into street fights. And, in true rich kid fashion, he never got in trouble for it. Spoiler, that whole setting fire to Rome thing? Not entirely out of character for him. And the fun didn't stop at taverns. Some of these gangs took it a step further. There are records of aristocratic teens stealing chariots for joyrides, throwing wild parties in public bathhouses, and even breaking into other noblemen's homes just to mess with them. Imagine waking up to a bunch of drunk 16-year-olds wrecking your villa and screaming, "It's just a prank, bro." But the absolute best part, Roman law enforcement was so corrupt that these rich kids basically had a get-out-of-jail-free card. If a regular person tried to pull any of this, they'd end up in chains. But if a senator's son did it? Worst-case scenario, daddy paid a fine, and it was all forgotten. So yeah, teenage rebellion is nothing new. The difference is that today, getting caught means detention. In Rome, it meant getting a senator to make the problem disappear. But whether you were starting street fights or just trying to survive school, one thing was certain. Being a teenager in ancient Rome was absolute chaos. And yet, somehow, some of them made it through. So, after all this madness, what was life really like for young Romans? Let's wrap this up. So, what have we learned today? Being a teenager in ancient Rome was not for the weak. You didn't get a nice transition into adulthood. Nope. One day you were a kid, and the next you were thrown headfirst into a world of responsibilities, brutal education, and some of the wildest parties in history. If you were a boy, you had to prove yourself through intense schooling, public beatdowns from teachers, and maybe even a little military service. If you were a girl, your graduation was basically getting married before you even had time to process what was happening. And if you were rich, you could get away with more. But that usually meant you were out drinking, brawling in the streets, or testing your luck against a gladiator. But here's the thing, despite all the chaos, some things never really change. Teens pushing boundaries? Check. Risky bets and bad decisions? Double check. Rich kids getting away with stuff they definitely shouldn't? Oh, absolutely. The only real difference? If you messed up as a Roman teen, there was no timeout. You were either legally responsible, financially ruined, or literally fighting for your life. So yeah, next time you think high school is rough, just remember, at least your final exams don't involve public beatings and possibly getting drafted into a war. Now the real question is, would you survive being a teenager in ancient Rome? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient chaos, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss more history that's crazier than fiction. Until next time, stay out of trouble. Or at least, stay out of Roman levels of trouble.